Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to our Monday night program. We don't do many programs on Mondays. This is kind of fun. If you don't know me, my name is Abby Huffman. I'm Director of Programs here at the Adams County Historical Society. I get the pleasure of getting to arrange speakers and get to hear them talk. So I think I have the best job here of anybody. But tonight we have a special program because we're going to be partnering with the Eisenhower Historic Site, and we're really excited to get to do that, especially with, it's not missed by me, today being 9/11. We're going to get to talk about service and sacrifice, not necessarily of the last 20 years or so, but of World War II and more focused with Eisenhower's. So we're going to kind of turn it over here to John. That's who you came to hear speak, but I do want to welcome you so much for coming. We do a lot of these programs. We have a few actually this week, which is great, leading up to World War II weekend when you guys are going to be a little busy. But we're really excited to welcome you tonight. And I want to give John a little bit of an intro, though I don't know that he really needs one. John Tuscan is a National Park Service seasonal park ranger at the Eisenhower National Historic Site and the historian archivist for the Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania. After 30 years of active duty, he retired as a captain, U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps. His uniformed services career also included active service in the U.S. Navy and U.S. Army. After retirement from active duty, he taught in colleges in Maine and Maryland. John and his wife, Sandy, who I believe is here tonight, both live in Gettysburg. So I'd like to give you please give a warm welcome to John. And John, thank you so much for your service tonight.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you everyone for coming out this evening. Really appreciate it. It's really an honor for me to be here speaking in this beautiful Adams County Historical Society building. This is great. You know, I just went through the museum this past week, and after a number of years deciding I should be a member, we finally became members. So if you haven't been through the museum, I encourage you to do that. And also, I'd encourage you to become a member if you're from Adams County here. It's a great treasure here in the community. So again, thank you. Patriots Day, 9/11, an honor to speak. And also, this is really the kickoff for our World War II weekend, our biggest event of the year. And actually, this is in the whole National Park Service nationwide. This is the largest living historian event that occurs anywhere in the country. It'll be over here at the Eisenhower National Historic Site. So if you're like that, come on over on Saturday or Sunday. Actually, I have a few slides. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that before we get started. But this is tonight, you know, the topic, Gettysburg Service and Sacrifice during World War II. This is a big topic, and I want to kind of consider this a primer to kick off the week. I have a number of different areas. Any one of the topics I'm addressing tonight could be a 2-hour lecture in itself. And I don't want this to be a lecture tonight. I want it to be more of the discussion. So if you have a comment or a question, you know, please, we can certainly like to entertain that, and we can catch up time as we go along. We have an hour dedicated this evening. So, you know, no worries. I don't want to lecture. Some of you may know something more about some of these topics than me, so please contribute if you like. I know Sam here. Sam's a Gettysburg College student, was our summer intern one, Eisenhower, and he's very knowledgeable. So please, Sam, please, anything you might want to contribute, please do. So the World War II weekend, September 15th, 17th, join us over there. Our theme this year is 1943. America at War. Last year was 1942. Now we're in 1943. So we'll be focusing on what's going on during World War II at that time. We'll have park ranger programs, guest speakers, living historians, partner organizations, all be telling stories related to 1943. Now our keynote this year, we're very excited. You may be familiar with Dr. Greg Simons. He's was the distinguished visiting Ernest J. King Professor of Maritime History for the academic years 2017-2020 at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. He's also Professor Emeritus at the U.S. Naval Academy, where he served as chairman of the History Department. He's the distinguished historian of the American Civil War and maritime history. His book, Lincoln and His Admirals, received the Lincoln Prize. His book, Neptune, The Allied Invasion of Europe and D-Day Landings, was the 2015 recipient of the Samuel Eliot Morrison Award for Naval Literature. So he'll be over at the main visitor center on Friday at 7 p.m. So if you're available, you might want to take advantage. He's a great speaker as well. And he has a new book out about Admiral Nimitz, if you're a naval history fan. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in 1943 in the war and the Grand Alliance at work. Here's our three biggest partners, right? Russia, Britain, and the United States. Now, get us up to date here. Until December 41, the war that begun in September 39 had been almost an altogether European war. With Pearl Harbor, the conflict truly became a global war at that time. Really the first one in the war's history. Asia, Europe, Africa, the seas and the oceans, including those around the Americas, were the scene of warfare between the Axis powers and the United States. Now, although the U.S. had been in other so-called world wars, this was truly the first one, and Americans had never played such a decisive or central role in the outcome of any world war before. Now, in 1917, 1918, in World War I, the U.S. insisted that it was not an ally at that time. It was an associated power in World War I, not an ally. And of course, in World War II, now the U.S. is going to take the lead in uniting this loose alliance between the various nations. Now, on January 1st, 1942, at the White House, FDR, Churchill, and the Russian ambassador and representatives of 3 other nations signed a declaration by the United Nations. Subsequently, 20 other nations signed a document. It related to the 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. They also agreed a series of strategies to invade North Africa in 1942, send American bombers to England, and the Brits were to strengthen the presence in the Pacific theater. Now, more important to all that, though, was this Grand Alliance. Now, 1942, so we're in 1942 now, that year started very inauspiciously for the Allies. Things weren't going well for us in 1942. In the Kursk Peninsula, German forces pushed back the Russian parachutists who landed on the eastern extremity of the Crimea. In the Philippines, the Japanese military pushed American and Filipino troops back in the Bataan Peninsula. Now, during all these setbacks, 42, Winston Churchill said, "We must remember we are no longer alone. We are in the midst of great company," and that was the United States. Now in 43, which is our focus this year, the Grand Alliance really began to function with much more harmony, and it clearly turned the tide against Germany. Russia began to push back the Nazis during the winter of 42 to 43. Of course, the turning point came at Stalingrad. We're on February 2nd, 43. The Nazis surrendered 90,000 men at Stalingrad. After that, Hitler was never able to unleash a major sustained offensive operation in the entire war. The Allies had cleared Africa of Nazis, and Italy had given up. The Allies controlled Sicily and the foot and ankle of the Italian peninsula. The naval war in the Atlantic also turned in favor of the Allies in 43. Germany lost 41 submarines in May of 43 and 237 for the year. In the Pacific, MacArthur's forces defeated the Japanese offensives in the Solomons and New Guinea decisively, and it turned out to be the last major offensive the Japanese would be able to undertake. So let's turn now, they've got kind of up to date of where we're at in 43. Let's talk about Gettysburg. Now, Gettysburg, whether in 1863 or 1943, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania has played an important role in the fight for freedom and democracy. Of course, on November 19th, 1863, Lincoln called on listeners to make sacrifices for the divided nation and to resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. In the Civil War's aftermath, Gettysburg became the epicenter of patriotism. Now, of course, World War II is going to force Americans to reconnect to their past and to reshape the meaning of the battle to make it relevant to their lives. You know, Lincoln referred to the mystic chords of history, which tie us all together. Now, during this national crisis, Americans looked towards Gettysburg to find meaning as well as a source of national identity. Gettysburg became kind of a national shrine. There were many speeches here on Memorial Day and so forth. No other park in the United States inspired the same degree of sentiment as Gettysburg did during World War II. Orators came to Gettysburg to inspire Americans to become better citizens, and no landscape brought the stark reality of the war for freedom and sovereignty. Now, Gettysburg's World War II story is multifaceted, and this is the challenge here tonight as we go through this. While the community's history is uniquely shaped by the battle here and so forth, its response to World War II, in many ways, Gettysburg is a microcosm of the American home front and many communities around the country. So just like many places, citizens are doing with scrap drives, gas rationing, and so forth. The battlefield also is going to see, it was a training ground for many World War II leaders before World War II. We're going to address that. It became an active training camp for psychological warfare. We're going to look at that. An active prisoner of war camp, and significant impacts from these scrap drives and so forth. In the community, Gettysburg College became a training ground for Army Air Corp cadets, and local citizens volunteered to help harvest crops to support the war effort in the rich agricultural lands around Gettysburg here in Adams County. Of course, there were the, we had the stamp books, ration stamp books, sugar, milk, eggs, meat, etc. were all rationed, gasoline rationing, and it was unlawful to sell these ration stamps. Actually, I still have some stamps from my parents, ration stamps. It was unlawful. You could be fined $10,000 for selling your ration stamps. But there were stories about people hoarding them. Maybe there was a wedding and they want the couple to be able to go off. They would hoard and everybody give their stamps to the couple, this sort of thing. But all that was really unlawful at the time. And the purchasing was limited for a period of time. You could only purchase certain things for a certain period of time. Now, Adams County, and I got this from our friends here at the museum downstairs, more than 6,000 men and women from Adams County served in the armed forces during the war. At least 122 Adams County residents gave their lives, and some 4,000 joined the Civil Defense Corps, air raid wardens, decontamination, demolition squad members, medical staff, first aid instructors, and emergency personnel. Now, we could spend another hour or so just talking about these day-to-day things, rationing and how life was in World War II. But I'm going to refer you to some good sources to explore this further. Now, this is a nice little book written by Bruce and Nancy Westerdahl. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to see this, but it's a book that they tell their own story here. And I think it's a great little read. It's not an academic work, but they tell the stories of their lives and when they grew up here and their remembrances from World War II. And it gives you a good overview of what life was like here. And if you would like to read more about that, I highly recommend that book. But the next place I want to go to is the Gettysburg National Military Park, since I am here in the National Park Service. Talk a little bit about what was going on here with the park. Now, I mentioned first there's going to be, coming to Gettysburg in preparation for the war, a number of future World War II leaders come through Gettysburg at various times. And first we have here 1909, 1913, General George Patton. Now, 1909, future General Patton visited Gettysburg with his West Point class for the staff ride, studying the ground where his grandfather, an officer in the Army of the Northern Virginia, had fought nearly 50 years before. Patton returned to Gettysburg in 1913 for the 50th anniversary of the battle, and taking in the commemorations alongside other young Army officers, such as Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. Now, Buckner was the son of a famed Confederate general, and he would go on to become the highest-ranking American officer to be killed in World War II, meeting his fate in Okinawa in 1945. 1915, here's my man, Dwight D. Eisenhower. 1950, he and his classmate Omar Bradley are here on their staff ride. This was the class that fell upon. 1915, they had more generals than any other class. The class the stars fell on, 1915. 59 members of that class went on to become generals, many in World War II, including young Dwight D. Eisenhower and Omar Bradley. 1918, you may know the story of Camp Colt. 1918, General Eisenhower is going to come to Gettysburg as his 27-year-old captain. It's going to be his first independent command as an Army officer. And his year, as well as spring, summer, and fall, 1918 in Gettysburg, is a critical year in his military career. Now, he thinks it's a death blow to his military career because he wants to be in France fighting, promotions come in combat, not in the stateside training assignment. But in 1918 here in Gettysburg, Camp Colt up on the battlefield, he's going to command over 10,000 soldiers, 600 officers. This is a brigadier general level of responsibility. It's the first place he distinguishes himself, and where he says for the first time he really learned responsibility. But it puts him on that trajectory. His year in Gettysburg is a foundation. 25 years later, he's 5-star general, general of the Army, Supreme Allied Commander, European Theater. Also, what do we have? 1922, U.S. Marine Corps held training exercise at Gettysburg. Among those in attendance was Acting Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who would one day earn a Medal of Honor on Utah Beach on June 6, 1944. Also present at the exercises, interestingly, was Osami Nagano. He's the attaché of the Japanese Imperial Navy, who 19 years later was chief of the Japanese Navy's general staff and a key figure in planning and executing the attack on Pearl Harbor. 1929, Captain Ira Aker and Lieutenant Casada, future commanders of the 8th and 9th Army Air Forces. Sam's a great Air Force historian. Respectively, took part in a military aviation exercise in Gettysburg in 1929. Aker, for a time, even oversaw commercial tourism flights over the battlefield. And future World War II Air Commander Curtis LeMay also took part in tactical air exercises at Gettysburg. Now, 1913, Winston Churchill also visited the battlefield February 1932 during a lecture tour in the United States. 1932. And finally, 1934-38, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt visited twice in the pre-war years, spoke in Gettysburg National Cemetery in 1934, and in 38, for the 75th anniversary of the battle, he spoke in commemorative ceremonies at the Eternal Peace Light up on the hill right here. So what's World War II? It's going to affect the battlefield, even though it was this shrine and there's orders and special events on holidays. Visitorship in the battlefield really dropped off greatly. You see, decrease in battlefield visitation served as the daily reminder that we're at war. Gas rationing curtailed battlefield visitation 90%. During the winter, visitation virtually was non-existent. In January 43, it was reported that only 84 people visited the battlefield. Now, the superintendent at the time, Superintendent Coleman, said park travel has virtually ceased except for men in uniform. Gettysburg National Military Park contributed many large amounts of raw materials to the war effort. Here you see some of those truck tires, truck office mats. Oops, sorry. Bronze guns, these round cannonballs I'll show you a picture of. 14 iron guns, 1 bronze gun, 8 bronze howitzers, 26 bronze siege guns. Now these were all manufactured after the Civil War. These were all surplus. By the end of the first year, they had contributed 18 tons of scrap metal in the first year. 36 panels of iron fence, 12 iron cautionary signs, 32 directional signs. Now, interestingly, this wasn't enough. You know, we don't know how the war's going to go. So in December 42, a report was made by the superintendent of the park that prioritized the park's markers and monuments for potential salvage. If this isn't enough, this was how they were going to get on the list. The first thing they were going to contribute was 19 bronze itinerary tablets from the battlefield. The second was 197 Civil War era cannons, as well as artillery tubes that marked the headquarters for the generals of the two armies. So you see those out in the field, the cannons that are, those would go next. Next would be 256 interpretive tablets. Miscellaneous decorative item on park monuments, like the muskets, drums, canteens, and flags that you see on many of the monuments. 19 statues. 6 was bronze inscriptive tablets on regimental or state markers. And 7 was reliefs depicting battle scenes or individuals. Now, the highest protection was accorded to 43 statues. These were statues of Union Corps commanders, equestrian monuments, as well as the bust of President Lincoln on the Speech Memorial in the cemetery. Now, interestingly, I find this very interesting. The last of the 3 on the list, the very last things they were going to give after all those were 3 monuments valued for their highly artistic merit. Anybody guess what those were? No. There were 3 Confederate monuments. VA Memorial, the North Carolina Memorial, and the Alabama Monument would have been the very last things taken from the battlefield for salvage, all dedicated to Confederate troops. Now, even with that, the National Park Service wanted assurance for those 3 that those memorials would be recast after the war. So they wanted pictures taken of them from all sides so they could be recast if they had to be donated. Now, all these sacrifices I just went over never had to occur. So that list of 7 down to these, none of that ever had to be taken away. This is a couple photos from the time. These are those round cannonballs. This is up at Devil's Den. These were, you know, for along the roadway. So these were all larger than, these cannonballs were cast after the Civil War, and they were larger than any used in the Battle of Gettysburg. But all these were given to the war effort, as were these. This is over on Reynolds Avenue, right up here, in Reynolds Woods. All these cannonballs along the road were taken and melted down. How are we doing for time there, timekeeper? Okay, so, all right, well, let's move on to some other things, special things going on here in Gettysburg. And one was the prisoner of war camp here in Gettysburg. The War Department granted permission in 1944 for a POW camp on the battlefield, to be west of the high water mark, south of the Home Sweet Home Motel on Emmitsburg Road. Does anybody know where the Home Sweet Home? It was right up, you know, where General Pickett's Buffet is. It's in that grassy area there was the Home Sweet Home Motel. Now, eventually, there's going to be close to 500 POWs here in Gettysburg on the battlefield and approximately 90 guards in the camp. But before they can set this camp up, on May 13th, 44, the Armory over here, Confederate Avenue, is going to hold 50 POWs that arrived first. They were housed temporarily in the Armory, and they're going to joined by additional 100 prisoners within 3 days of the initial arrivals, with another 350 prisoners arriving 1 week later. So there eventually, again, there's going to be close to 500 German prisoners of war here, 90 guards. And they're going to be located after they move from here to a tent camp on the edge of the borough over there by the Home Sweet Home Motel. This is a sketch of the camp drawn by the camp commander, Major Lawrence Thomas. And you can see it was 60 feet by 400 feet with guard towers on each. Here's the Home Sweet Home Motel. Here's what's this long lane, I think, when you pull in there. Emmitsburg Road right here. Military personnel over here, the 90 guards. So this is what the camp's going to look like. Looking down the 10-inch, this is the mess hall down at the end here. Now, 2044, 425 prisoners began to work on the pea harvest on that date. Now, any farmer, fruit grower, or packing plant company in need of help made application to the local employment service in Gettysburg. Mr. E.A. Krause was the chairman of the service at that time. It was his responsibility to coordinate contracts with local farmers and industries with the military. The original group of prisoners, among those hundreds, were assigned to 14 canneries, both fruit and vegetable, 3 orchards, 17 farms, 1 stone quarry, and 1 fertilizer and hide plant. Prisoners were transported and guarded by military police to various locations in Littlestown, Biglerville, Hanover, Chambersburg, Middletown, and Emmitsburg. The prevailing wages paid by the employers were $1 per hour, which actually wasn't bad paid back then, with 10 cents per hour credited to the prisoner's account. So the government took 90 cents of every dollar they were making. Now the United States government cleared $138,000 on this one camp from June 8th through November 1st, 1944. The prisoners were not paid in cash, but they were given coupons which they could spend in the post exchange. After the vegetable season, the prisoners were employed to pick cherries. The government had contracted all of the Pennsylvania orchards and cherries, all orchards and cherries gathered by the ton. None were available to civilians. All the crops were used for military services. Now the prisoners picked and ate what they could. And they thought this was much better than picking peas or beans, because they could pick these cherries and eat them all day. Eventually, as the harvest season ended, the number of prisoners in the tent camp diminished to 200. These men are now going to be moved to Camp Sharp, which is down McMillan Woods, is now Camp Sharp. They were moved there on November 15th, 1944. The camp here on Emmitsburg Road was strictly a tent camp, so as winter's coming on, they needed warmer quarters. Prisoners were cutting pulpwood and helping to clear underbrush. This is a photo of some of the German enemy prisoners of war. I just wanted to share with you some of the issues that came up with some of these prisoners of war. Of course, you're going to have some, you got hundreds of prisoners, you're going to have some issues come up. One prisoner hanged himself while the group was working at the Adams Apple Products Corporation. Whether the suicide was a result of harassment from other prisoners or homesickness or fear of the future, no one knows for sure. 2 prisoners escaped from the tent camp and evaded capture for 8 days. But they traveled not more than 30 miles. And then they didn't know where to go. They didn't know where they were, and they didn't know where to go. So they just came back. Once or twice, prisoners attempted to strike, but their problems were quickly resolved, aided in part by the fact that Captain Thomas, the commander, spoke fluent German. So this ability proved to be helpful, also in identifying the SS prisoners, the stormtroopers, who they would separate from the conscript. Some of these guys just surrendered the first chance they had, the draftees. And they wanted to get them away from the hardcore SS prisoners as quickly as possible. All the prisoners were noted to be treated very fairly under the Geneva Convention. All the prisoners were said to be very familiar with the convention and sometimes raised issues if they thought all the roles weren't being met. Now, for the guards here, this wasn't the most exciting duty, for the 90 guards, guarding these guys, picking cherries and so forth. So the local citizens here in Gettysburg provided opportunities for the soldiers. They had, the USO offered recreational activities, ping pong tables, pool tables, reading materials, movies, and so forth. And Camp Sharp was closed down in January 1945. All right, another Camp Sharp story, okay? Camp Sharp is the psychological warfare training program. The Psycho Boys, they were called. It's also in the same area where the prisoner of war camp. Now the Psycho warfare, this was operational from November 43 to November 44, which is why when they pull out, the prisoners they can move the prisoners over there. So again, it's off Confederate Avenue, McMillan Woods, you may be familiar with that. We're going to have 800 men trained there. Psychological warfare, a relatively new thing here in World War II, psychological warfare. Now, what is this Camp Sharp? Now, up until 43, the camp on the edge of the Gettysburg battlefield, which became Camp Sharp, was a civilian conservation corps camp known as CCC Gettysburg II. It housed an all-black unit of the Civilian Conservation Corps members brought in to clear the battlefield of brush, build bridges, roads, outbuildings, and in general beautify the battlefield before and after the 1938 Civil War veterans reunions and the dedication of the Peace Light. The CCC vacated the camp in March of 1942. Now it became named Camp Sharp. Anybody familiar with who Sharp was? He was General Meade's intelligence officer here in Gettysburg. All right, so the first men to arrive there came from Fort Ritchie down the road here near Waynesboro, Camp Ritchie at the time. They had a military intelligence school there. And they had 60 trainees who completed military intelligence training. And they were going to be trained as commandos and rangers to be sent behind enemy lines, parachute behind enemy lines to collect information about enemy movements and so forth. Now these guys were pretty physically fit, tough guys. They marched from Waynesboro to Gettysburg in the winter. They're going to sleep in tents and on cots and so forth, eat out of mess kits, very rough training. And they were called cattle alerts. They're going to go behind lines, cattle alerts, they refer to it as. Now they leave, and now the next group that comes is going to be this over 800 men, and this is a different group of trainees. Now their overall mission, military intelligence propaganda services. Now their idea is the objectives is shorten the war, lower enemy morale, ease their transition, because we're looking now towards the end of the war. We can see that on the horizon at some point. Ease the transition of Germany from a Nazi stronghold to American-controlled democracy. To get the Germans to believe in what they were being told by the U.S. and the British, and second, to get the Germans to question their own regime. Now, the Army wasn't real excited about this, but there was one senior leader who believed in this, and that was General Eisenhower. A lot of the wartime leaders thought this was a waste of time. You know, you fight the battle with guns and tanks and airplanes and ships, not sending leaflets out and broadcasting things and so forth. But he was a believer in this. He was one of the few Americans who wholeheartedly bought into the concept and coordinated, actually under his command there, Supreme Allied Headquarters, wartime and intelligence activities, and thought it was an important part of the war effort. And he's going to be shown to be pretty accurate in that. So the Camp Sharp, there's going to be 4 barracks of enlisted men, 1 barracks for officers. There was a battalion headquarters, a rec hall, supply, showers, latrine, mess hall, motor pool, and 2 working dispatch centers. Now these guys, as they were saying, these trainees were a bit different. They were all hand-picked. Let's see, I got this. Now hold that for a minute. Again, their task, you see, preserving lives, winning hearts and minds. You can probably cover that. Now, training depended on their experience, who they were. Now, most of these were hand-picked, and unlike these other soldiers that came, who were professional soldiers trained in intelligence, these were journalists, artists, photographers, novelists, actors, railroad crews, and guys from other odd jobs. Now they were hand-selected. 1/3 were Jewish German refugees. There were 30 different languages spoken in that amongst the trainees. And each trainee was fluent in at least two different languages, very highly educated. Lieutenant Hans Habie selected each man. He's a very interesting character. I have a reference for a book if you want to read more about this too. There's one volume really dedicated to Camp Sharp. They were often hand-selected because of their intrinsic knowledge of Europe, whether by experience or study. Lieutenant Habie was chosen as the commander because of his excellence in interrogation, creating propaganda, where he gained his experience in North Africa with the first mobile broadcasting company. So their training, they were cross-trained first in basic soldiering skills, which a lot of these guys resisted because they had to know how to fire weapons, take them apart, all the vehicles, repair vehicles and so forth. Some of them were resistant to that. Again, a lot of these guys are writers and professors and what have you. But they were going to be trained in the basic soldiering and then interrogation techniques. Things like, and I had a couple examples here. Interrogation techniques. They were told things like headgear must be worn when the prisoner enters and leaves the interrogation area because the German soldiers not familiar with salutes rendered while uncovered. He taught the soldiers how to evaluate whether a prisoner was going to be tough or easy to crack. As a rule of thumb, the easiest prisoners were thought to be the Poles first, the Yugoslavs, the Germans, enlisted men, then non-commissioned officers, and then the officers. Their good question to this is if they were going to try to figure out, is this going to be a tough guy to crack or not? They'd say a good question to begin with is, how long do you think you're going to be a prisoner of war? A tough prisoner would usually give a defiant answer, such as until the war is over. If he answers, I don't know, he is likely to prove an easy prisoner. And you may follow by asking, do you think you will be sent back to Germany right after the war? If his answer is yes, he believes in German victory. If no, he has admitted by implication his belief that Germany will lose the war. A good method of warming up a tough prisoner is to ask how he has been captured, because it affords him an opportunity for self-justification. For an easy prisoner, simple warming up questions such as what part of Germany are you from or how old are you is adequate. He would do things like tell them, even information you know, give the prisoner a chance to answer it. Because it might seem inconsequential to them, and then they'll keep talking. Next thing was radio monitoring. They would go up to the front lines, listen to German broadcasts, German newspapers and so forth, and write reports on those, radio monitoring. And the third thing here was called hog calling. I'll tell you more about hog calling in a minute. But when they were deployed, they're going to go over with the D-Day invasion. They're going to be assigned to units in different capacities. First sent in 4 mobile broadcasting companies and then split into smaller groups. Assignments varied when deployed, documenting war zones and concentration camps through photos and films, creating, monitoring radio broadcasts, serving as translators and interrogators. We're talking about creating propaganda leaflets. They developed an artillery shell that could be dropped with leaflets in it, and explode, and the leaflets would go about. Now this serving as hog callers. A hog caller was deployed to the front lines in various vehicles, and they would broadcast live to the German soldiers. So they're right in the front line, firing's going on. They're broadcasting. Now they were told to limit it to, they had 9 seconds to do their broadcast, because after that time they're going to receive incoming rounds. So they had 9 seconds to do their hog calling and get the heck out of there. Oh, there was interesting, I wanted to share with you a couple things that happened here in Gettysburg. One time broadcasts went through the wrong frequency, and Gettysburg locals were told to surrender to the Americans. During field training exercises, 2 men dressed as German soldiers were taken by locals suspected to be POWs, and they captured called the military police. Then after training, they were sent to England for further training and testing before being sent to the front. And I have a few photos. This is here in the front. You can see the, the Jeep. They got their broadcasting. So these are hog callers up there. They're riding up, saying what they have to say in 9 seconds and getting out of there. Here's doing a radio broadcast. Here's a tank with a hog caller. I don't know if you want to be sitting, behind that speaker. That's really going harm's way. Here's another hog caller putting up ready to do a broadcast. Okay, so the results. What was the results of all this? Now there were those again who said, these are paragraph troopers. They're just riding, they're not really fighting. Although they did not kill Nazis, though, their activities may have resulted in hundreds, even thousands of desertions. There's a lot of evidence to support that. And they served as a vital mediator now between the Americans and the German forces. And they probably accounted for a lot of surrenders. Now, if you, this is the book I was referring to, Camp Sharp's Psycho Boys. It's an excellent read. It's probably the only volume I know of dedicated to this topic. So I'd highly recommend that. There's some great stories in there. You get more of the background. The only thing that remains of Camp Sharp now is the original flagpole that stands down in the McMillan Woods campground. Now, General Eisenhower said at the end, without a doubt, psychological warfare has proved its right to be a place of dignity in our military arsenal. All right, now I couldn't find a nice picture of the Lee Mead Hotel, so I had to get a postcard. Anybody familiar with the Lee Mead Hotel? It was it was over across from the Peach Orchard on Emmitsburg Road, over here. It was home to a map-making facility during World War II. Across from the famed Peach Orchard in the heart of the battlefield, it was used by United States naval engineers who produced voluminous quantities of detailed maps of the Japanese homeland and islands in preparation for potential invasion of Japan. These maps were even used in American bombing campaigns of the Japanese homelands and islands. The work there received much praise from Admirals King and Nimitz, two of America's five-star admirals. Yeah, moving along, I want to spend some time on Gettysburg College. We got at least Sam's here tonight from Gettysburg College. So, now, what's Gettysburg College going to play a significant role here in the community in World War II? First, they offer early commencements. Now, a lot of the young men are going off to war, either as draftees or enlistees. They sponsored blood drives, scrap metal drives at the college. Now, the ROTC programs, we're going to talk a little bit about the Army Air Corp training. They had 64 students and alumni killed in the war, and 3 are buried here in the Gettysburg National Cemetery. So, Gettysburg College Air Corps program, it's really an interesting story. The 55th College Training Detachment, they provided educated officers for the Army Air Corp. The Air Corps, they found that if they had pilots who were educated, they were better pilots and officers. So they're going to come here to Gettysburg College. They're going to be instructed in basic military drill, marching, saluting, military custom, physical therapy, medical aid, flight training at Boulevard Airport, right up here on Emmitsburg Road. And then in academics, in physics, math, English, history, and geography. At the outbreak of the war, many male students enlisted or were drafted. In 1943, the number of male students at the college was only about 100. It was 500 the year before. Of course, incomes for small colleges like this really dropped during the war. The Army took advantage of this to institute the military training programs. Colleges needed financial help. The colleges had the space to house and train the cadets, as well as the faculty available to teach the academics. Educated men who understand math, physics, and geography made better pilots, bombardiers, and navigators. Now, Gettysburg College was one of several chosen by the War Manpower Commission and the Army Air Corps to participate Other institutions included University of Arkansas, Oklahoma A&M, Eastern Oregon University, and 10 other Pennsylvania colleges, including Clarion State, Penn State University, and Dickinson College up in Carlisle. So the college announced its participation in February 1943. First group of 275 cadets arrived on March 3rd. A total of 1,659 completed the training from March 43 to 44. They had 700 hours of academics and 10 hours of flight training right here at Gettysburg. Also, I should mention that Temple University had an Air Corp program, and they could not, there was air restrictions over Philadelphia. So they actually, that Lee Mead Motel we saw, they actually rented a number of the rooms here and brought their cadets to Gettysburg. And they had their flight training here with the Gettysburg students. This is a photo of the 55th College Training Detachment, October 11th, 1943, here at the college. Okay. Okay, well, we're right on time here. So I wanted to kind of wrap up our discussion tonight with talking about the World War II burials here in Gettysburg National Cemetery, and also mention to you, if you have an interest, on our World War II weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 5 p.m., we're having cemetery ranger walks, where we'll talk about some of the World War II burials there in the cemetery. If you have some interest in joining us at the rostrum, I'll be doing the one Friday, so if you can come by, please do. But just a little bit about the burials there. Next of kin were sent questionnaires in 1947. What do you want to, World War I, for the first time, we had this, what are you going to do with the number of servicemen killed overseas? You're going to be buried overseas. Do you want to bring them out? What are we going to do? So they would send questionnaires to the next of kin, asking them what they wanted. You buried in an overseas American cemetery or brought back to the U.S.? Questionnaires were sent to next of kin, giving them the option. Over 45,000 families chose to have their loved ones brought home, many to be buried in a private family plot. Remember, 30,000 chose to have their loved ones buried in a cemetery overseas. Following World War II, this is World War I. World War II that dealt with the question on a much larger scale. Over 400,000 Americans had been killed across the globe. Once again, the questionnaires were sent out. Of the 280,000 American World War II dead who were identified, 171,000 were brought back to the United States at the request of the families. 90% of those were interred in national cemeteries. Now here at Gettysburg, the cemetery had expanded only slightly from the 1860s. Civil War veterans, aftermath of World War I, led to new burials, but nothing like we're going to see in the 1940s. Now, in 47, the Park Service planned to expand the burial areas. The 3 new sections were designated outside the avenue of the Soldiers National Cemetery, 1, 2, and 3. They were to be limited to no more than 600 burials there. Now, the number of requests were just overwhelming, because even people not from this area in Adams County were choosing Gettysburg as where they wanted their loved one buried, because again, it's the significance of the national shrine. So over the next 3 years, over 500 of those killed in action in World War II were buried here, and today are 590 World War II servicemen buried in Gettysburg National Cemetery. And I just want to end the program tonight talking about one of those, because he died on this day, September 11th, 1943. And this vessel you see here is the USS Savannah. It was a Brooklyn-class light carrier. In 1942, the Savannah supported Operation Torch in North Africa. And in 1943, it was involved in invasions of Sicily and Salerno. Now at Salerno, on September 8th, 1943, the Savannah was the first U.S. ship to open fire on German shore defenses. 3 days later, on the morning of September 11th, at 9:44 a.m., a German radio-controlled Fitz 10 glide bomb hit the ship. And you can see her, she's on fire there. Tore through gun turret number 3, set off a massive blaze. The bomb then hit a ship's magazine and detonated, and the Savannah began to list and take on waters as the explosions continued for over an hour. Now, amidst, and then we got to show you some, so there she is, she took the hit, she's on fire. Here's the crew responding to the damage on deck. Coming out, the gun turrets are full of smoke. There's explosions occurring throughout the vessel. You can see here some bodies that are already being taken out of the turrets. They're trying to control the fires. Here's a picture of some of the crew going in to try to rescue their comrades, pull them out of the smoke gases and treat them. Now there's one sailor. This is George Pulaski, who I wanted to just end our talk tonight about. Now George, 1942, he enlisted in the Navy at the age of 20. He began his training in the U.S. Navy, and by December, he graduated from the U.S. Naval Hospital Corps School, Great Lakes, Illinois, North Chicago, Illinois, where I also went to school. George holds a certain place in my heart. He served as a hospital apprentice, first class. He was serving on the Savannah that day. Now, amidst the carnage of that going on in the ship, George was one of the many who sprang into action in the turrets. The losses were heavy as they filled with flame, smoke, and toxic gases. In turret number 2, 35 of 40 men were killed. Pulaski and others worked to pull as many men out of the turrets as possible before they were overcome by smoke, gases, and flames. Now, with danger all around him, young George showed only concern for his fellow sailors, pulling them to safety, administering CPR. He was in the process of rescuing a crew member when he himself was overcome by smoke. He died attempting to save the lives of his fellow sailors. He was one of 197 crew members who lost their lives on the Savannah that day. He was 21 years old when he was killed. For his actions that day in January 44, he was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. The citation accompanying the cross read, Pulaski unhesitatingly risked his life to enter one of the turrets, and unmindful of the imminent danger, coolly evacuated personnel who had been overcome, continuing his unselfish service until he himself was overcome while administering artificial respiration to one of the men he had rescued. As a result of his heroic devotion to duty, Pulaski eventually succumbed, gallantly risking his own life in order that others might be saved. He was initially interred overseas in Italy, and his family chose to have him come back to the U.S. 5 years after his death. The U.S. Army transport Victory brought Pulaski back along with 473 others, docked in New York Harbor on July 7th, 48. All 474 aboard were being brought back for reburial in Pennsylvania. He was reinterred in Gettysburg National Cemetery on Wednesday, July 28th, 1948. So thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Was he from Adams County?
No, he was not. He was from, where was he from? No, he wasn't from Adams County. I had here. His parents were immigrants from Poland. He was from New Jersey. He worked for the Army. He worked for the Army Arsenal in New Jersey. Any other questions or comments this evening? Yes, sir.
The reason I asked that question, my uncle, Samuel Reaver, is an Adams County native who won a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars in the Army during World War II. And I'm trying to determine whether or not he's the most decorated soldier from born and reared in Adams County.
Mm-hmm.
From World War II. And I'm kind of stuck.
I'm not sure where to. I I guess the archives, I'm not sure how, I know a lot of those records were destroyed in a fire. It'd be hard to determine. Any other comments or thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your service and thank you for continuing the 100 days of apps. That's a great gift to Adams County. And thank you for this evening. There's an awful lot of things I didn't know. My husband's uncle died in World War II and my father served. So thank you so much for this.
You're welcome. Anything else? Well, thank you all for coming out this evening, spending this September